Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here for Torah Study this morning, joined this morning by my dear friend Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and the outlaw Rabbi Marc Gellman. Welcome. Good morning, friends.
Hey, good Shabbos, y'all.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos, y'all. Good Shabbos. Good to have you here. For those who are joining us, it's a delight to have you here. Just for programmatic purposes, understand that after Torah Study, we urge you to stay tuned, and we'll have Shabbos services beginning at 10 o'clock. And then following Shabbos services this morning, our dear friend Rabbi Hillel Silverman offers some further thoughts on this morning's Parsha at about 11:30 here on Facebook Live. So please join us and share this Shabbos with us. Good morning, Marc. Good morning, Sherre. It's good to have the two of you with us. This week, the rhythm of this quarantine and the rhythm of the virus has sort of really asserted itself. And an announcement was made yesterday that all of the summer camps and Israel programs sponsored by the Reform Movement have been canceled. Ramah Darom, Camp Ramah in the south in Atlanta, has been canceled. The other Ramah camps are deciding their program now. That's a devastating. That plus the fact that schools are now announcing that they're no longer going to be. They're not going to finish in person. All the schools are going to finish online. The New York public schools announced that. The LA schools have announced that, and most of the Jewish schools are announcing that. Sherre, you got kids at home. I saw one of them just pop in a moment ago. What do you do with kids? What are families doing with kids?
Since this announcement, I have not slept because my Jewish life and my break from my kids revolves around Jewish camp, right? That is when they go be Jews. They have the best time of their lives, and I get to reconnect with my husband and have a little bit of time alone. And I'm not sure what we're going to do. I have 2 kids that are supposed to go to Israel, 2 kids that are supposed to be at camp. It's a little bit of a mess. And I think what's even more of a mess is my kids are sick of seeing us. They're sick of seeing me. They're sick of being with me. Camp was what the hope that they were looking forward to. Okay, we can get through school digitally because we have camp. And now that sort of dream is taken away from them. And they wait all year for camp. I mean, as a camper, I did that. Everybody waits all year for camp. And so it's bigger than just this summer. It's sort of, wait, this is my sequence. This is what I do. This is my routine. This is my sacred, holy script of my Jewish life.
Yeah, if I could say that's a very powerful description of the personal impact of this decision. But of course, there's also an institutional impact. And that institutional impact is that for the conservative and the reform movements, these camps float the boat. I know it's about $25 million that something in that range that the reform movement gets from their camping program, which enables the URJ to continue to exist. And the same is true in the conservative movement. So just think of this. People need to think of the dominoes falling, what this means. It happened before with B'nai B'rith when they lost their tour business and all of a sudden they couldn't fund the Hillel program that I was in at Northwestern as the director there, and other Hillels. They lost the whole institution, and Sherre knows all about that. But what happened is that B'nai B'rith basically disappeared. And so now the only other source of income for these congregational associations, these associations that represent all the reform and all the conservative synagogues in America, they only have one other source of income, really, which are the dues that are paid by the synagogue. Now, many synagogues like yours and mine and others are running deficits now, both because of bad times and, of course, also because of this economic catastrophe brought on by the coronavirus. So we have the real possibility here of the collapse of all the institutions of organized Jewry. This is a fundamental catastrophe.
It's not simply a catastrophe though for this moment. One of the things that concerns me, and just for everyone listening, we will get to the Torah reading in a minute. I promise you. It's just this is a chance for us to process this a little bit. I was speaking to one of my rabbinical students. I teach at the AJU in the rabbinical school, and a young man is trying to find a position in the community. And he tells me that there's a list of all the open positions around the country, and the list has been shrinking radically week to week. Well, what happens when young rabbis like him can't find work? And what happens when synagogues running major financial deficits need to cut back on their staffing? What happens isn't just that those people lose jobs, it's that it ripples to the next generation. Why should anyone go into a field that's a shrinking field? Why would people want to devote their lives and so many years of study and preparation for a professional career when there aren't positions available? And so you're going to end up with a ripple effect through the next generation of Jewish professionals. And that concerns me greatly because it's, raising money is never easy. But finding a talented person, a young person particularly, who's willing to give 40 years of service to the community, who's willing to devote their imagination, their energies, leadership in the community, losing that person is genuine catastrophe. Genuine catastrophe.
Eddie, I can't reiterate that even more because you have to make adulthood to your children look appealing. We have to make the rabbinate look appealing. And if we cut down, which we have to for financial reasons, the positions, the current situation makes the rabbinate also unappealing. You're working like a dog, like as it is, you work like a dog. And then you have this understaffed, under-resourced position. So the ripple effect is on two levels. It's for the future, but it's also for the present. How do we make this job look appealing in these circumstances? I think that's a huge problem. And we want people to be Jewish professionals. That's how we grow and disrupt and innovate in Jewish life.
Right. And that becomes, this is one of the long-term effects that Marc references in terms of the institutional impact. And then, of course, I worry about what you worry about, which is, kids who have had a tough time stuck at home with their parents watching screens for school and don't even get a chance to go outside and play and spend the summer in camp. It's a real difficult moment for the community.
Can I add one more thing as a parent to young children and teenagers? Camp is where you reinvent yourself. It's where you get to be Jewish without your family. You get to have a different persona. It's so important to your development. And a way we speak in American Jewish life is like, what camp did you go to? What summer did you go to? How many summers? So disrupting that conversation also has a ripple effect and reverberations long past this moment. It's devastating.
I wish I could offer you a note of hope, but we'll have to see how this plays out. Let's turn, friends, to the Torah for this week. This week, we once again have a double portion, Acharei-Mot Kedoshim. The portion, the first of the two portions, Acharei-Mot, concludes the cycle of the stories the laws and traditions of the book of Exodus, the first part of the book of Exodus, by giving us the rituals for the cleansing of the tabernacle. And it's the section read on Yom Kippur. It really introduces us to a God of second chances, a God who is willing to absorb human imperfection and allow us the opportunity to cleanse ourselves and cleanse the institutions of the community from the violations that we might have heaped up upon those institutions. And in that sense, it's a terribly hopeful section. But then we turn the page to the second Parsha, which is the one I'd like to concentrate on today, which is Kedoshim. Now, this is the beginning of a section that scholars believe is its own section of the Bible. It's called the Holiness Code. And in this sense, the book of Leviticus turns away from the priesthood exclusively and turns to the people. It begins with the phrase, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the whole Israelite community. So we're not talking to priests anymore. We're not talking about the inner workings of the priesthood, the sacrificial cult. We're talking about the life of ordinary people. And it begins with this clarion call. It's sort of the textual equivalent of the first bars of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, right? Bum, 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 bum. And it begins with these words, Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. You will be Kadosh. You will be, and it's translated as holy. We'll come to that in a moment. You will be Kadosh because I, God, am Kadosh. You have the capacity to bring into yourself one of the characteristics of God. Or in other words, you have the capacity to live a godly life. And this begins a whole section of laws and regulations that are going to spell out how one lives how one lives a life of Kedusha. And the question I want to ask you is, what is Kedusha? We use this word frequently in Jewish life. In English, it doesn't help us because we translate the holy as sacred and sacred as holy, and we talk about things being elevated. But I want to explore for a moment, what is this Kedusha? What is the life that God or that Moses or that Leviticus is inviting us into in this Parsha? And I'd like to offer a proposal. And I'm going to acknowledge at the very outset that my proposal is completely counterintuitive because it's counter to what all scholars have said. If you read scholarly literature, Kedusha, Kadosh, means separated and elevated. Separated and elevated. So you take something out of the flow of the ordinary and you make it special. So Shabbat is taken away from the days of the week and becomes Shabbos Kodesh, the holy of the Sabbath. The Jewish people are taken out of the flow of history and away from the ordinary populace of the world, and we are Am Kadosh. We are the holy nation. The Torah is a book that is Kodesh. It's holy because it's not like any other book. That's the way it's normally translated. And then this line, the line we just read, would be understood in the same way. You are not to be like everybody else. Because I, God, am different, you're going to be different too. But I want to propose the exact opposite idea. And I realize that this is a little controversial. So here's my basic idea. First, let's do a little language game. Let's see where we use the word kadosh. On Friday night, when you gather with your family around a table, you lift a glass of wine and you say, kiddush. Now, in the other definition, you'd say, because Shabbos is different than the week, this makes this meal of Shabbat, this bracha over the Shabbos, recognizes the unordinary, the super mundane, the uncanny notion of Shabbos. But that's not all there is to it, because you're not sanctifying the wine. Wine is just wine. It's Manischewitz. You're sanctifying the moment. And the moment is a moment of togetherness. It's a moment of bonding around the table. Let's take another one. Two people are in love. They bond with each other in responsibility and care. You put a ring on a finger and you say, Harei mikudeshet li. This person is mikudash li. Now, again, it can be seen as taken out of the normal flow of populace, but kiddushin in Hebrew means marriage. It's the ultimate worldly bonding. Third, someone I love has died, and on the anniversary of their death and during Yizkor, I stand up and I say Kaddish, because I represent. Because I know again it's a separate relationship, but more than that, I want to suggest that Kaddish, Kiddush, Kiddushin represents bonding, making the many into one, connecting the disparate into a unity. And one more proof text. Tonight at the end of Shabbos, we'll make Havdalah. And the fourth bracha of Havdalah, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lichol. That we give God glory because God has given us the capacity to tell the difference between Kodesh and Chol. The opposite of Kodesh is Chol. Chol means secular. It means ordinary. It means mundane. But literally, the word Chol means sand. Like on the beach, sand. You take a handful of sand, you hold it in your hand. What happens? It flows out of your hand because the grains of sand are atomized. They're individual. They don't stick together. Kodesh means bonding. And what God is saying here is, I am the God of all. I am the creator of all, and I am that which holds all together. And I'm asking you to become a vessel of that project, of bringing the disparate, bringing the isolated, bringing the separate, bringing the many into a whole, into one, making the world into one. And that's the project of Kedusha that we're invited to in this Parsha. Now, I have more to say about this, but what do you think?
Yippee! I agree with what you say.
Oh my God. Are you okay? Do you have
I'm
the virus? Someone has stolen Gellman and put an automaton in his place.
I think that's brilliant contribution and true. Brilliant and true. I would only add one question, really, and that has always been my problem with Kedusha. I believe it is bonding. I believe it is a coming of the holy down into our life and gluing it together. That the spiritual glue of our world is Kedusha. I'm with you 100%. The problem with Kedusha, and the best way to explain this problem for me, would be to take the English phrase, sanctity of life. The sanctity of life. You know, you hear this phrase a lot, particularly in political discussions and and ethical discussions about abortion and euthanasia and treatment of the terminally ill. And the question is there any actual Jewish belief that human life is holy? And my controversial view is that there is not. That Kedusha, as you described it, and as I agree with, is about sacred time, holy times, sacred events like a wedding, or human beings can be Kadosh when they are dead. A corpse is Kadosh. A living person is not Kadosh. You are defiled. It's an irony of Kedusha that when you touch something that is holy, you're defiled. But if you touch a person, you're not defiled. So that's my proof that the reason it's Kedoshim to you is that God wants to teach us through this text, this luminous text, that you are not holy. People are not holy, but they are set on the path towards holiness, the striving toward holiness. And the reason we are not holy is that we have a Yetzer Hara, we have evil inclinations. The only time when we're purely holy is when we're dead and we can't do anything evil anymore. Can't do anything good either, but that's when the book of our life is closed. So I would only add that I don't think people are holy in their lifetimes. I think holiness is an aspiration, not an attribute. And what do you think of that?
So first of all, is someone cooking in your kitchen, Marc? Because I hear a lot of scraping or something.
You know what that is? That's Betty packing up my books to move to Florida.
Oh God, don't remind us of that departure.
You know, well, we can still do this.
So, Eddie, first of all, I think that reading is so beautiful. And Kavod HaRav, to add a midrash and to unify what both you and Eddie said, I think in life, Eddie, we are in the pursuit of bonding. And the reason we're Kadosh in death is because we've synergized and gathered all those connections and taken them with us to our grave. So one is an active process and one is the culmination process. And I think the striving towards bonding is in itself holy. And I think of a more powerful time than right now when we're so distanced and some of us are experiencing such profound loneliness that the quest to find Kedusha, the quest to find connection and binding, especially on Shabbat, is more important than ever. Kol hakavod to you.
Thank you. So what's interesting about this then is if you look at the laws that proceed from that first opening overture, you have a series of laws and regulations. And what's interesting is most of them cannot be enforced. These are not laws to be enforced by police or by courts. These are ethical standards to be taken up by an individual, by a community that sees itself in pursuit of this ideal of holiness. And some of them are very classic, and I want to just take a look at them with you because I think they're so interesting. Because what you end up here is a picture of a life that could be. Marc is exactly right. This is an aspiration. It was only Korach, by the way, who was the great rebel that we'll meet in the book of Numbers, who says to Moses,
holy.
Right, he says the people are holy. And the difference between you are holy and you are, and holy you shall be, is a world of difference. If you are holy, then there's nothing to aspire to. You don't have to work at it. But if you say that the world is not yet there and you're not yet there, then what's the aspiration? Well, you know this aspiration. The aspiration is Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav. A mitzvah is an act which I engage in, which brings a quality of holiness to my life and to the world about me. And so now you get these mitzvot. So the first one, you shall revere his mother and father. Ish imova aviv tira. You shall revere your parents, right? And keep my Sabbath. And that's a reiteration of the middle of the 10 Commandments, of course. But here it's important because the way the context is, if I'm revering my parents, I'm maintaining the bond of family life.
Excuse me, this is Leviticus 19:3.
Right, 19:3. Thank you. And Sabbath becomes an expression of family life, right? The next one is interesting. Al tifnu el elilim ve'elohim asecha lo ta'asu. Don't turn to idols or make molten gods. Ta'asu lachem. And here I would mistranslate this and say, don't make an idol, not for yourself, but of yourself.
Right.
Because what's the opposite of bonding is when I put myself on a pedestal and say, the world revolves around me. That kind of egotism, that infantile arrogance and egotism is what makes it impossible for anyone to enter into a relationship with me. Relationship only begins when I climb off my pedestal and I enter into an equality with another person. I had a kid come to see me because he wants to get married. And he says he met this girl and she checks all of his boxes. That was the language. He says, she's everything I wanted, right? And I said to him, you're not ready to get married. He says, but I told you she's perfect for me. I said, yeah, the problem is all you can think about is what she does for you. And you haven't begun to think about what you're ready to do for her. And that's when love begins. I mean, love, you can't be married by saying, oh, I get everything I want out of my partner, right? You get married because you're ready to give your partner everything that they need. It's a complete reversal of the idolatrous formula, right? The next one is.
I think before you go to the next one, I have to just add a note to that. I think you're letting men off too easy here. The truth is that men have no idea what Kedusha or love or any of that is. They're just totally wrapped up in themselves. After 40 years of marrying people like you, I would say to brides and grooms who would come to me, I'd say, so what do you love about the other person sitting here? And what do you love about him? And the women sitting before me over 40 years, bang, they knew exactly what they loved about the guy. He's kind. He makes me feel wonderful. He takes care of things. He makes me feel safe. He helps other people. He on and on and on. And when you ask the guys, what do you love about her? This, I'm telling you, over 40 years, this was 99% of the respondents said exactly these words. Ready? I'm now acting out the role of a soon-to-be bridegroom. Rabbi Gellman, what do I love about her? What do I love about her? Me? What do I? What? Me? What do I love about her? What? What? That's what they mostly said. That was it. And occasionally, the more articulate ones, the more sensitive ones, the ones my daughter used to call snags, sensitive New Age guys, the ones who really were in touch with their emotions, they would say, I love her because she gives me the remote.
Okay. I have to interrupt you, Marc, and I don't want to go down this road, but it's so gender what you just said, and times have really changed. And that was, I think, a product of that men were not encouraged to express their feelings. Because I have been married couples for 40 years. I've been married couples for 20 years. And I see the most beautiful words from men, women, women to women, men to men, expressing a profound desire to be there, to support, and to fulfill the needs of the other human. And I think it is just a language issue. I don't think, and Eddie, you teach and work with men specifically. I've seen that over the years. I think there has not, it's now, only now, that we are evolving into a culture that gives men the freedom to speak like that.
I agree. I think things are changing, but that is how it used to be, and it still is in some ways.
But don't want to take you too far afield, Rabbi Feinstein.
No, I appreciate. No, it's important because Marc is right to this extent that we rabbis have this remarkable invitation to step into people's lives at these wonderful times. Marriage and the preparation for marriage is one of them. And it's such a powerful revelation. It's a time of revelation when people are discovering themselves and we're discovering who they are. And the other one, of course, is at funerals, when a life is ended, as you said a moment ago, that only upon death are we able to gather in all the threads of a life. And again, it's a generational thing, I think, too, because how many times have we done funerals and a son will stand with me crying and said, I know my dad loved me. He just was never able to say it, right? Or I know he loved my mother. He was never able to tell her, because there was a generation of men who were taught to be strong and stoic and silent. And they worked hard to protect their families, and they shared their wealth and their resources, and sometimes they shared affection in interesting ways with their children and with their spouses, but they weren't effusive in this. It was considered unmanly to be too expressive or too effusive. And that's a sadness. That's a sadness because
my father was one of those men.
Yeah, it erodes the relationship. I mean, one of the things, Sherry's right, that one of the revolutions in our culture is not just the liberation of women, but the liberation of men. I want to take a look at just two more laws in this Parsha, because I believe this Parsha, I mean, if I had my way, we'd study this for 6 weeks, because there's so much here, which I think it's such a remarkable portrait of the ethical capacities and the ethical horizon of being a human being. Look at this law. Come with me to chapter 19, verse 14. You will not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You'll fear your God. I am the Lord. You'll not insult the deaf, and you'll never put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Now, again, that's a law. It's not a law in the sense of a stop sign. There's no police that can enforce this, because the deaf doesn't hear what you say, and the blind person can't testify that you did something. But the idea of looking at another human being and being able to empathize and feel the pain of that human being, and being able to understand that human being's connection with you, it's just a remarkable insight into the ethical capacity. It's not always dog eat dog. It's not always a competition. It's not always a struggle for survival. There is the capacity within us to care, to love. And then if you'll turn the page, of course, the denouement of this whole section of law on page 6, it's verse 9, chapter 19, verse 18. It's on page 697 in Eitz Chaim. You'll not take vengeance or bear a grudge. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Now, that's such an interesting phrase. You will love the other. Ve'ahavta, you will love l'reacha, the other, your companion, kamocha. Now, what does the word kamocha modify? Is it you will love them as you love yourself, so that it modifies the word love? Or does it modify reacha? You will love the neighbor who is just like you. Or if we want to go even one step further into a mystical pantheism, the other who is you, the other who is part of you, the other who is inseparable from you. That is the highest moral principle. That is the highest moral aspiration that the Torah or any other tradition has ever put forward.
Yeah, and I would say that this verse, that 1918, that goes "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," is proof of several fundamental things in philosophy. The first, a truth about theology, is that every religion in the world has this. This is fascinating. Every religion in the world does not have a belief in God. Buddhism doesn't have a belief in God. You'd think that's what all religions have. No, they don't. But every religion in the world, everyone, and I write as the author of that, the Dummies series, A Religion for Dummies. I studied all the religions of the world. They all have a golden rule. All of them. They have some version of the golden rule. And so that's the first thing, that we learn from it, that there is a universal morality that doesn't require revelation, doesn't require Sinai, that religions that don't have Sinai and don't have Moses and don't have the Torah or the Mishnah or the Gemara, they also have the same ethical foundation. And the second is that in secular philosophy, and we learn this from Immanuel Kant in his Critique of Practical Reasoning, it establishes the fundamental rule about what makes something moral, what makes something ethical. And that is, if you can universalize it, if you can say, this isn't just what I want, but this is what any person in this situation should want and should do. The version he wrote was that you would act only on that maxim which you would will to be a universal law of nature, which means, in common English, that unless you can say that everyone should do something, this thing that you're talking about, whatever it isn't ethical. If you can say everyone should do it, that is, or no one should do it, no one should steal, no one should murder an innocent person, things like that, those are ethical because they can be universalized. Things like light Shabbos candles, don't eat pork, the rituals of Judaism, they may be right, they may be wrong for Jews, they may be right or wrong for us to do, they may have an element of what you talked about before, Eddie, which is Kedusha, in bringing into our life a sense of special relationship with God, but they are not ethical. They are not ethical laws. There's nothing ethical about lighting a candle on Friday night or listening to a shofar. And the reason is you cannot say everyone on the eve of Rosh Hashanah should hear a shofar blast. You can't say that. And that's what the Golden Rule does. It doesn't just say, well, you were slaves in Egypt, so remember the slave and be kind. And the tradition about the blind person and the deaf person, that's a universal law. It means don't exploit someone's weakness. Don't exploit their weakness. If they're a drug addict, if they're an alcoholic, you don't serve them a drink. If they have certain obsessions, you don't feed those obsessions. So we don't have that many verses in the Torah that are philosophical and universal and ethical in a way that transcends Judaism. This is one of them. And so I wouldn't teach this for 6 weeks. I would teach this for 6 years.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm going to argue with you on this point. It's true that blowing a shofar, not eating pork, lighting Shabbos candles are symbols that belong to the Jewish people because they're deeply rooted in the narrative of the Jewish people, but they have very powerful ethical implications. I mean, the idea that I take a time each year, 10 days each year, to perform an act of deep introspection and examine my moral account and see what kind of moral person I am in the world, that is a universal ethic. The shofar,
Amen.
the
But
shofar,
why do you do that without hearing a shofar?
of course, but because the particular symbols that I attach to an ethical imperative, are going to be arbitrary and related to my own particular culture. Look, it's you stop on a red light and you go on a green light. Could have been the other way around. But the idea of stopping and allowing the traffic to go and not hogging the intersection to myself is an ethical rule. So the shofar itself
is universalizing it. But stopping on a sign is for everyone, Eddie. No, you want to take something else? Take shatnez, mixing wool and linen. Come on, tell me what the ethical element of that is. No, and I'm not speaking against Jewish rituals. Understand me. I'm speaking about the fact that something that cannot be universalized cannot be ethical.
But underneath the language of the symbol is the ethical principle. And not all of them, you're right. There are some which are just simply, ancient rites whose meaning we don't understand, like shatnez, although there's some people that have written on that. But Shabbos candles, they're deeply ethical, because the idea of taking a day a week.
This portion, I'm pissed now, because this portion has Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13, which says that if you lie with a man the way you lie with a woman, you should be killed. And I'm sorry, the reason this is not only not ethical, it's wrong. So the fact is, we have to be open in our tradition, Ed. We have to be open to the fact that some of what's in here is only for Jews. It's just for Jews. Some of it is for every human being.
So
and
I think
of it that's in here is wrong. Some of it is wrong.
I think you're categorizing the laws. Can you guys hear me? There's prophetic wisdom, there's wisdom, and there's priestly wisdom. And you're saying, I think you're both right. Eddie, you're saying, I'm Switzerland today, that the shofar leads you to the behavior that inculcates the ethics. And you're saying the shofar in itself doesn't inculcate the ethic. I get that. But the shofar is not the destination. The transformation is the destination. So does every halacha, every law in Kadoshim have ethical value? No. But the totality of it to lead you to a transformative being in the world that behaves ethically and moral is the value of it. I have to tell you guys a story because it's so relevant. I have a dear friend, Rebecca Alexander. She, at 19, when she was at Columbia, started to develop Usher syndrome, which means that she slowly went deaf and blind. We were honored together many years ago and for Jewish Women's International, and the greatest gift of being honored was getting to stand by her, hold her hand, and walk her to the podium. This week, she's often in the news because of her books, because of her speaking, because of her inspiration. This week, she wrote as a woman living alone in a social isolation what it meant to not put a stumbling block before the blind and not to interfere with the deaf. And I have never read Kadoshim in such a way after reading her article. I'll have to share it with you all. But truly, it was about, this is an ethical way we have to be in the world, because we don't know who stands before us with Usher syndrome, literally, physically, with the inability to be deaf and blind, but also who emotionally has deafness and an inability to see and an inability. And that's what Kadoshim is trying to teach us. So blow the shofar and let it lead you to the transformation. So I agree with you both.
The question is, Marc, take a breath, and Sherre.
This is the reaction to the fact that I agreed with you before. This is making me nuts. This is making me crazy.
I'm worried about you, Gellman.
I know.
Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And I want to finish with this. Is it possible? Is this an ethic of possibility? It's certainly an aspiration. But in your experience in the world, is this something that people can actually do?
That's a wonderful question. And I have an answer which may surprise you. The answer is no. The answer is no, because it's so profoundly aspirational at its core. And this relates to a discussion you and I have had before, one that I had for many times over with my friend Tom Hartman, may his memory be blessed. And that is whether this law of treating your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself, whether that includes unconditional forgiveness. I think it does, because you would want to be forgiven if you did something wrong. But it leads some people, like the families from Charlotte, built the Mother Emanuel Church slaughter there by the murderer there, Dylan Roof. It led them to unconditionally forgive the person who slaughtered their families, their friends. I can't get to that. I can't unconditionally forgive the murderers of Jews in the Holocaust. I can't do it. I want to do it in a certain theoretical way. But so to answer your question directly, can we fulfill V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? No. And the Buddha gives us the answer. The Buddha gives us the answer, which is that our ego gets in the way, because we always love ourselves more than we love our neighbor, always. And it is only when we destroy our ego and enable ourselves to enter the rest of the world without attachment and without illusion that we can perform this great and sacred and holy mitzvah.
Sherre.
I would say I hear very clearly what you're saying, Marc, but I don't want to believe it, because I want to live with the hope that every day I have the ability, and that my fellow human has the ability to love themselves and to love the stranger, whether it's themselves or the person they don't know or their friend or their enemy, in the way they love themselves. And so to me, it's aspirational. Is it achievable? I don't know, but I'm on a quest to find out.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing Torah study this morning. Thank you to everyone who shared our Shabbos morning. Once again, following our Torah study at 10 o'clock, we have Shabbos morning prayers. And then at 11:30, a few words of Torah from our dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Hillel Silverman. In the coming week on the Rabbi Study program here on VBS, the VBS Facebook page, you'll find my conversation with Ron Wolfson. And on Wednesday night with the American Jewish historian Jonathan Sarna. Professor Sarna is the author of a wonderful paper talking about how the Great Depression changed Jewish life in America. And I asked him the question I asked my colleagues here at the beginning: how will this event change us? And come Wednesday night at 7 o'clock and listen to Professor Sarna's answer to that question. I wish you a very good Shabbos. Friends, take care. Be well. Shabbat shalom. Stay healthy and stay well.